Hi, everyone. I'm MJ Zorik, Solutions Architect here at WP Engine, and I'm excited to welcome you to this conversation on leveraging headless WordPress in agency projects. We all know that headless can unlock incredible performance, flexibility, and developer freedom, but it also comes with added complexity and responsibility. And while some projects absolutely benefit from going headless, for others, it might be overkill. So knowing where to draw that line is a critical part of being a good strategic partner. That's what we're here to talk about, how agencies make those calls. Whether it's recommending traditional WordPress, a fully headless solution, or a composable hybrid approach, these decisions aren't one size fits all. And sometimes clients come in with big ideas or buzzwords in mind, but not the internal readiness to actually support them. To explore this, I'm joined by three folks who have been in the trenches, whether that means building complex headless setups from scratch or inheriting projects and figuring out how to make them work. We've seen what works, what doesn't, and how to guide clients toward the best fit for their goals. Let's meet our panel. Scott Stimili, Senior Solutions Strategist at WPromote, Ellis LeMay, Director of WordPress Operations at AmericanEagle.com, and Keshwani Mayur, Senior Project Manager at Multidots. Thank you all so much for being here. To kick us off, I'd love for each of you to introduce yourselves, share a bit about your agency's work, and how headless fits into your project portfolio. So let's start with Scott.
Sure. My name is Scott Stimili. I'm a Senior Solutions Strategist here at WPromote. I have about 15 plus years experience as an engineer in digital marketing. And over that time, I've seen a lot of change in web development in the marketing space. And I am excited to talk to you about headless WordPress and how it fits into modern web development.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Mayur, would you like to go next?
Of course, yeah. Hello, everyone. I am a Senior Project Manager at Multidots, where I specialize in the WordPress Enterprise project. I actually also actively participate on the technical solutions, some kind of the technical discussions, pre-sales activities, demonstrations, right? And manage the high traffic and performance driven headless WordPress projects. So Multidots is a global digital agency that helps to the organizations and maximize their web performance through the WordPress websites and applications. Beyond the work, I enjoy the card games and PlayStations and cricket. Excited to work with the headless talk.
Great. Thank you, Mayur. And Ellis, how about you?
Sure, absolutely. Hey, great to be here. My name is Ellis LeMay. I'm the Director of WordPress Operations at AmericanEagle.com. And I've been working with WordPress for the better part of the last 15 years, I'd say. And what I do a lot in my daily role is work with prospective clients and existing clients to help put some shape on new solutions for them by getting embedded in their businesses, understanding what their plans are and where they're headed, and then lining up the right strategies with them. So probably kind of similar to Scott, I would imagine. And in the course of doing that, I encounter all kinds of scenarios, and headless has been coming up more and more in the last 4 or 5 years. So I'm excited to be here and hear what everyone has to say.
Great. Thanks, Ellis. So it sounds like all of you have been doing WordPress for quite some time, and your agencies have as well. One of the main topics we're here today to talk about is headless. So I would like to kind of pose the question to all three of you. When did your agency first start exploring headless WordPress? And if you can elaborate on that, and maybe what was your agency's main motivation for considering headless? Mayur, would you like to go first?
Of course, thanks. Sure. So we started exploring the WordPress actually around a few years ago, 2018. It was becoming popular in the WordPress community. We saw it as a great solutions, enhance the solutions we offer to our clients. So our main motivation to improve the performance and of course the scalability and the performance that I can say, especially client with high traffic websites needs like a large e-commerce website or the content heavy platforms, I can say. And we also wanted to future-proof our services and solutions, keeping up with the digital trends. So yeah, that's my, I can say, point.
I would say we started getting more involved with it and considering it, proposing it as a solution, probably about say about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe around 2000, somewhere in there. And I think one of the biggest drivers for that was prior to that, we had heard lots of just sort of rumblings about headless, the potential it had, right? There was a lot of marketing material out there around a lot of the services and products related to headless. And so it was just showing up on the radar more and more. And at the same time, we were getting more involved in enterprise level work where we were building solutions for really large companies where oftentimes there were several different divisions or departments and teams on the client side involved in content management. And across the board, they had lots of different logic as to how that content needed to be managed. And so ultimately, headless and approaching implementations that way seemed to offer much more flexibility in terms of meeting those requirements for a lot of those disparate groups. I think that would probably be the main driver for us.
We started working with headless primarily, I think, around 2019. It was driven largely by a move up in sort of enterprise clients that we were seeing in our agency, but also there was internal developer interest. I think was a big driver for us. So the two of those, and then I think over the last few years, the maturity of the front end frameworks has really helped a lot. Like settling for us on Next.js as our sort of framework of choice. We do work with other things as well, but we've sort of focused in on that, specifically like solving certain problems, which I'm sure we'll get into later in our discussion. And so that I think covers a lot of the headless piece. The WordPress side, I mean, we've had a long history of working with WordPress. Not exclusively, but like my entire career here, we've always had WordPress going on. And so it's a logical fit to start figuring out how WordPress could fit into that headless approach that we were offering more and more of.
So there are many reasons for going headless. A lot of people start with speed and performance as the key reason. We kind of see these as table stakes, right? Like speed and performance, we would expect to see out of your site. But what do you see as other key reasons to pursue maybe a hybrid or fully headless build? Mayur, would you like to go?
So beyond the speed and performance, other key reasons include, I can say, when clients who needs to publish the content across the multiple platforms. In other words, I can say the omni-channel where web, mobile apps, other external services, right? So that is, I can say, great benefit from a headless approach. That's my first, I can say, the reason. And decoupling is the front end from the CMS can improve the security by reducing the attack as well, right? So security wise also, I can say the second reason, which is the great benefit from the headless approach. And the third thing is about might be integrations, right? So that's integration with as an external service. If you want to integrate the marketing tools or any payment gateways, any custom APIs, allowed us to build more adaptable solutions here. So yeah, this is the, I can say, reasons I can say apart from the speed and performance, we should suggest the headless approach.
Yeah, the omni-channel is a great example. That's perfect fit for a headless build. Scott, have anything else to say on that?
Yeah, I think performance and security are two obvious benefits, but I also think, that's not to say that a traditional approach is insecure or low performance. I think we've found we can make both of those things the case for a traditional site as well. There are two things that I see as being real factors for us. One is platform flexibility. If a client has complex integrations, with multiple platforms, potentially, like just throw some thoughts out there, like WordPress and Shopify, or other potential data sources, it makes a lot more sense to integrate them into a front end that can support multiple platforms as opposed to something that's more monolithic and locks you in. The second, I would say, so platform flexibility is a big one. I think the second thing comes down to benefits of the front end framework that you're choosing. If you want to move away from that monolithic approach where the front end is defined by and locked into the platform that you're selecting, headless allows you to decouple those two things and choose an appropriate front end and pair it with whatever backend potentially makes sense for you, whether it be WordPress otherwise or a combination of multiple backends. So those are the two real like key areas that we kind of focus on.
And I think another factor that goes along with what they shared with flexibility is you have more flexibility in how you approach certain problems and break them down. So like an example I'll share is when it comes to like high traffic scenarios and you're maybe having to like kind of optimize on the fly or somewhat reactively to like very large traffic spikes, you have the flexibility to optimize your content management system and your front end independently of one another, right? Versus in a more monolithic scenario, those have tighter data contracts and they're just harder to optimize independently together. So I think you have a little bit more, probably what people would call like DevOps agility or developer agility to be able to reactively address things like that. And I think that's a big draw for a lot of organizations where performance is pivotal.
What are some signs that headless might not be the right solution, even though the client needs more than a traditional WordPress setup? Do you have any example situation where you determined that headless wasn't the best solution, where it may have been first considered? And I'll just elaborate on this. I know there have been times when you will meet with developers and they get very excited about new technology and they want to push that maybe headless and the new framework that they want to use. But sometimes it's not always the best solution. So what are some signs that you can think of that it may not be the best solution for that scenario?
Let me jump here, MJ, if you allow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So honestly, based on my experience and knowledge, decoupled is an ahead of layer of extra complexity, I can say, right? So additional code base maintain and additional skill set required, engineering extra efforts required. Sometime might be to extra server as well required, right? So extra server, extra skill set engineer, and might be the training and documentation is also required for the editorial team, right? So that's, I can say, the clear sign here, I can say, when the client has lack of engineering or client wants to finish the project on the limited budget. At the time, I suggest that we should not choose the headless approach, right? Because it's kind of, we require sometimes the extra resource to implement the headless approach as well. So that's my perspective here, MJ. Yeah.
Okay.
I can jump in here as well. So back in I think 2018, 2019, when we started working on headless sites, we saw a huge trend towards headless as kind of a buzzword, right? Like we'd have a lot of interest from clients. And I think that sent a lot of projects in a direction where we would use headless for almost everything. And I think what we found over the last few years is that headless fits in some use cases, like what we were describing when you need platform flexibility, or you have a team of developers that are focused on React or similar frameworks. Is a good reason. I think if you're looking for simplicity overall, if cost is a huge consideration for you, typically a headless site is going to be a more complex solution. It is by nature of the fact that you have two platforms you have to deal with, a front end and a back end separately from each other. Whereas using WordPress as an example, you have one host, you have a back end platform, and that backend platform is also providing you a solution for the front end that covers a huge variety of different use cases that in the case of a headless architecture, you need to bring a lot of those solutions with you and that expertise with you, which has huge benefits for customers that need that flexibility, but can be a disadvantage if what you're looking for is to get to market very quickly with a lower cost solution where potentially maybe not an off-the-shelf theme is a good choice for you, but the ability with WordPress to have a theme or extend with plugins and then extend almost limitlessly. The scalability of WordPress is, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but the scalability of WordPress has really proven itself over the years to be more than just a limited blogging platform. But there are certainly situations when introducing that extra layer of complete customization of the front end can provide huge benefits. So, pros and cons, right? It's not just it's not all win.
I completely agree, Scott, with your point. And if I can share one extra point, MJ here, sometimes what happens that clients, editorial team, and marketing team is used to with the WordPress native features, right? They are used to with the block editor, editorial workflow, and at the time. So sometimes, they are uncomfort feel, right, through the any extra technology and that. So at the time, we should find any alternative solutions as well, right? How we can achieve their objective in the solution, the headless or any alternative solution. So that's an extra point. If we have any extra training and documents at the time, we should also think about that headless is a good option or not for the client perspective.
Yeah, I think kind of speaking from some of my experience and what I've seen over the years, I think some of the things that jump out at me is like maybe not good fits for headless, or where there should be some caution exercised would be, I talk to a lot of people who frankly have pretty simple website needs, right? They might have a big complex corporate site, but then they have like a small microsite to represent something else. And all in all, it's a simple small site, and headless is just overkill. It just kind of adds maintenance overhead to the situation. So there's just nothing wrong with keeping things simple now and then. I think some of the other things that jump out, Mayor mentioned this earlier, I believe, just limited resources and budget. You need to have the people and the time and money to maintain robust systems like that. And then one thing that I don't think was mentioned so far, and there might be people in our audience who want to vehemently argue against this. I'd be interested in what they have to say. But I think for sites that have very complex SEO strategies, sometimes headless can just add additional complication to the picture. Not to say you can't solve it, but it's something you need to be aware of going into it, right? Because headless ultimately, the linchpin is client-side rendering. And so setting up very complicated semantic structures and metadata can be quite complicated, or just involve extra steps in a headless development scenario that I don't think some people are often quite prepared for, and especially when they want to be able to pivot their SEO strategy a lot, right?
Yeah, I think it's maybe worth just addressing that point here. I think it's maybe like a misrepresentation of some information that we've heard recently that, for example, like headless is not SEO friendly, or that headless is not able to be like parsed by AI, for example. And I think that's just been a misunderstanding of what those articles are referring to, is that client-side rendered sites struggle with this. But we've found, I think a big benefit of these of headless originally was thought to be client-side rendering. You could do these cool whizzy things on screen without reloading the page. And that makes a lot of sense for like web applications, what we would consider web applications, like, think like Facebook or whatever. But for content-oriented sites, we've really found that we needed to move in a direction that embraced server-side rendering, or ISR, and that those solutions solve a lot of the problem that you'd see with SEO or with indexability of Google, basically by pre-rendering sites, at least in the form of their static content, or hydrating dynamic elements on page after the page has been loaded, can really just solves the problem of SEO if you're sort of handling it in the right way. So I just want to sort of call that out, that if there's any concern in our audience that headless isn't SEO compatible, I think there's elements of that need to be considered. It's not just true or false, but done the correct way. And I think most of the people on this, everyone in this call, I'm assuming, is doing it the right way. This is a solved problem. Headless is an SEO friendly approach to web development.
Yeah. ISR is something that we recommend a lot. It's that's why it's important when you're first starting out the project to really kind of think through the rendering strategy. What are the business requirements, content update frequency, and balancing out that performance and content freshness. And then there are many benefits to using ISR, and SEO definitely being one of them. I want to touch on one more thing before we move on. I think Mayer and Scott, you touched on this a bit. So we talked about key reasons to go headless, but why headless WordPress, right? So oftentimes it could be just the familiarity with the admin for the editors and content creators, but why headless WordPress versus maybe some of the other solutions out there that maybe are just fully API driven?
I tend to think of this as a question of So we talked about the sort of like why headless piece. Once you've got that sort of out of the way, it really, to me, is a question of once you've decided you want a headless approach, why headless compared to other headless CMSs that can potentially, be the backend for your headless site. And what we've found is just WordPress obviously is one of the most popular platforms on the web right now, right? It has pretty much been for as long as I can recall. And that comes with it a lot of familiarity from clients. Even clients that are at a higher like enterprise level, they'll often come from experience with WordPress and like it from a content management standpoint. So that's one big factor. Another big factor that I see compared to headless, other headless CMSs is that a lot of them are software as a service, like platforms. WordPress, because it's a open source PHP based platform that you can host either on WP Engine or otherwise, you have an enormous amount of control over that platform. And when you look at like plugins like ACF, which are kind of like become an industry standard, some of the options that plugin provides, I think because of its maturity, like there are things that ACF is able to do in terms of like field options that I've not really seen in other headless CMSs. So there's just an enormous amount of control when you need it, flexibility, maturity there. So we find it to be a really solid option, even if you're just relying on ACF. But then you also have the ability to move in that block editor direction if you want to, and have that sort of visual drag and drop experience as well. So we just see a lot of like benefit to WordPress in general.
So in this case, I can add here, Scott, especially the WordPress community, right? So we have a used WordPress community. They can contribute on the codes, third-party plugins. Lots of options are available. Then open source that you already shared. And specifically, if I can share here that the most of the plugins provide some REST API options as a part of the plugin, so that will be help to the headless. So yeah, that's the only reasons. Lots of resource, community, and plugins are available. So that's the reason I can say WordPress is most popular for the headless CMS.
I'm going to move on to one more topic, and this is more along the lines of what may be a hybrid solution. So we've seen where sometimes parts of a website will be built hybridly. So you'll have a composable solution, and the blog or another kind of content column will be built headlessly, but there might be other parts of the site that are maybe still just served directly from WordPress. So why would you build some parts of a site headlessly and some parts traditionally? Or have you had that experience?
What happens that sometimes clients or the system module demand the different kind of the features, right? Sometimes, for as I explained in my previous questions, right? I mean that sometimes we want to implement the traditionals or the headless CMS, right? So when we have a content driven pages like the about us and contact us, at the time we should go with the traditional approach. But when we want some dynamic data like the user dashboard, e-commerce platform, we want to implement the scalable front end options, interactive front end part, at that time we should go with the headless CMS. So quick answer here, MJ, I can say it's based on the user modules and the systems what they demand, right? If they demand it differently, then definitely we should go with the hybrid options here.
Yeah, I could see there being like use cases for hybrid scenarios where you have maybe like just different ways that the organization wants to manage different kinds of content. Where maybe in one area of the site, they want the flexibility to be able to like drag and drop components around in a Gutenberg scenario, get the live previews, because they're ultimately creating something kind of organic, right? Versus maybe another type of content where what makes it effective is its structure and continuity from one post to the next. An example of this might be like a very large international law firm where they're going to have profiles for their personnel all over the website. That is the kind of thing that you might want to be very structured and have continuity from one profile to the next. But then maybe in a case study type scenario, you want the flexibility to be able to pull different kinds of visual components in and out of the content body, because you might have graphs or you might have some other type of visual component, but in one post, but not others. So I think a lot of it comes down to the type of content being served and how it's likely to maybe vary in shape and form from one content piece to the next.
I can also just add a few thoughts on this. So I haven't had experience working with, I'm not sure, maybe this isn't what you're referring to, where a single page might include both the traditional and headless. I'm not sure exactly if that's where you're going with this, but we've had a client in particular comes to mind that I think they were a sort of financial education client, and they had very complex internal sort of administrative like departments that divided one department, which was marketing, from another department, which was like corporate branding, and another from the actual like service that they were providing. And that service was primarily like, let's say they're a software as a service company. So that's very heavily managed by a team within the company that's really providing the product that this company offered. But the corporate aspect of the site needed to be managed by a completely different team that had entirely separate budgets and had different technical needs. The way that we were able to approach that is the product team was able to continue working with their product, which I think was a headless solution. I'm not sure what their backend platform was. It might have been custom. But using reverse proxies, we were able to set up a traditional headless site that allowed for the front end to continue to be managed. Sorry, I misspoke there. That allowed for the corporate portion of the site to be managed within WordPress in a very traditional, fairly low budget way, using a custom theme that allowed us to match it to some degree to the rest of the site, but having both of those live at the same domain without the way that you used to do it. You'd have, like, say, a Shopify site that was, maybe a headless Shopify site, and then you'd have a subdomain for WordPress. Reverse proxies sort of solve the need for that any longer. So you can continue getting the SEO benefit of everything going to that one domain, while still having completely different, like, this isn't even just a matter of multiple backends. It's a completely isolated front end and back end in two different sections of the site that are sort of effortlessly presented to users without them even necessarily knowing that anything's changing. That's just what comes to my mind.
That's exactly what I was thinking, where it is still a completely decoupled architecture, but you use reverse proxies so that the user doesn't even realize they're moving across two different sites, same domain, and you can serve some of it headlessly and some of it, maybe from the theme of WordPress. And oftentimes there maybe are business needs for this, or there could be technical reasons why some of it might want to be served from the different decoupled sites. But yeah, all under the same domain. So I just wanted to touch on one more thing here, and this is around client education, because it is like WordPress. WordPress is very well known. Obviously, we know it powers 40-something% of the internet. But headless WordPress in general is less well known, and because it isn't always fitting. But I was wondering if any of you, when you do decide that headless build would be a good solution for a particular client, and you include that composable architecture in your headless proposals, are the clients already up to speed, or do you find that you might need to educate them on what you're proposing? And if you do find yourself educating clients, what have you found especially convincing?
From our end, we get clients coming at us from different, all different perspectives. Many of them will already have previous experience with headless, and maybe not even within their own company, but often a new marketing manager will come on that has experience in another company, that has an interest in this, that has a positive experience, and they already sort of know where they want to go. But there's a lot of of companies that are just either unfamiliar with it. And what we'll usually do is go through an initial pre-sales process where we'll it's kind of a light discovery where we'll try to understand what their technical needs are, what their existing infrastructure is and where they potentially can go, and whether or not headless makes sense for them. If they're interested in headless already, like they're coming with that as like a preconceived idea that they're looking for, sometimes we find like, this is not maybe the best fit for you. And that will often come down to things like we discussed earlier, like cost, a need for sort of infrastructure simplicity, or there not being a clear benefit to adding the complexity of headless on top of things. And so what we'll often do is break that down into a comparison, try to include like even pricing in that. That will often even include like hosting prices as well to try and fully understand what the cost is comparatively between the two, since headless being that you do even with WP Engine, who has like the benefit of covering both of those sides, that does reduce the complexity a little bit with having one account to log into. That's a big incentive, but it's still more costly typically than just hosting a traditional WordPress site. So we'll try and present them with those different pros and cons and, help them arrive at a decision. And it's not always go with headless or go with traditional. I think we've gone, in different directions with different clients based on their needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about you, Alice? Have you found any client education necessary when proposing a headless solution?
I'm thinking over all of the, conversations that we have with different kinds of prospects and clients. I think that there is always an educational component. I think a lot of it boils down to working with them to ensure that it's going to be a good fit for how they expect to work in an ongoing sort of maintenance scenario once the solution is built and deployed. Because we work with a lot of clients that have developers in-house on their side, but they're also then sort of partnering and collaborating with us. And a lot of the educational discussions are around kind of what are the expectations on both sides? Who's going to manage what? Who's going to make decisions around what? And how does that kind of all come together in a development workflow in terms of deployments and source control and things like that? So yeah, there's always an educational component to it. I think sometimes we've also had to educate clients on some of the challenges with headless, and that's in scenarios where they maybe heard the buzzword, but outside of that initial bit that they heard about it, they need to have like a more well-rounded education around it. So, yeah.
So we talked about client education, especially when maybe you need to hand off the site. So how much does the skill set of the team you're handing it off to, or if you're going to keep the maintenance of this site internal, how much does that play into whether you're going to pitch a headless build? If maybe the skill set isn't there for the team you're handing it off to, does that change what you're going to offer, or you still want to offer what you think is the best solution?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely more technical overhead. I think it's somewhat irresponsible to just build a new site headless or otherwise, but particularly if it's headless, and you can't really just sort of throw that over the fence and say, here's your site, we're out. If they're, often we have ongoing relationships with our clients where we sort of, after a new site development, we'll continue to have an ongoing relationship where we continue to maintain or even manage the site for them. But I think that needs to be understood up front. If they don't have in-house resources that are comfortable doing React or similar front-end framework development, or at least some team that's able to continue maintaining, like they will have problems. Node needs to be updated, right? You're not going to have at some point you'll try to do a deployment and there'll be a problem, and you need people to be able to fix these things. So certainly having an in-house team or the support of an agency to be able to continue maintaining that site after the site launch is kind of critical. There's also some other things to consider too with specifically with WordPress, that an understanding that like some of the things that you might have been used to with traditional WordPress are more complicated or simply not available. You generally can't just install a plugin and expect it to provide the functionality on the front end. So we'll often need to build solutions that either reintroduce that functionality within the backend, or rely on a plugin and extend the support of that plugin, essentially building a custom front end in support of it. Like some examples of that would be things like redirects that you might want to manage within WordPress with like a redirection plugin, or Yoast. You just install Yoast and throw Next.js front end on things, you're not going to get any. So that's kind of a good example of what we were talking about earlier, where there are things that need to be considered with SEO as well. But if you account for those things and understand that you need to account for those things, you can arrive at really positive results.
Candidly, I think budget is probably the biggest driver a lot in the daily conversations I'll have. Because to Scott's point earlier, the last thing you want to do is give your client a wildly sophisticated solution that has got all these cool factors to it, but that ultimately is not usable for them because they lack experience or resources. Early on in my career, somebody who's kind of a mentor to me pointed out that essentially what I'm doing every day is consulting people, right? And one of the iron rules of being a consultant is you leave your client in a better situation than that which you found them, and there's a lot of ways you can do that, but giving someone a solution that, you kind of promote as like cool and innovative, but if they can't use it, then the cool innovation almost doesn't matter. And kind of looping this around to the budget factor I mentioned when I started talking, if a client's approaching me telling me that their utmost priority with the solution that they're inquiring about is budget, that almost immediately eliminates headless as a possibility. Because I also view headless implementations as a very creative space, right? Versus the more monolithic approach where there's more tried and true practices around that. I think a lot of headless it is very innovative. There's a lot of, different ways you can approach it. And because of that, you need the budget to ultimately be creative and play around with ideas. And if you don't have that budget, then you just need a more tried and true path. So that is ultimately how I look at it a lot in the daily conversations I will have with people.
So we're coming up to the end of our time here today. I hope today's conversation helps shed some light on the questions we all wrestle with. When headless makes sense, when it doesn't, and how to guide clients toward the right path. A huge thank you to our panelists, Scott Stimili, Ellis LeMay, and Keshwani Meyer. We're so grateful for the insights you shared. If you want to stay part of the conversation around headless and WordPress, be sure to follow WP Engine on our blog and social channels. We love helping agencies solve complex technical problems and assemble the right tech for the right sites. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of Decode.